I have a project for you. First of all, I'd like for you to read an article that I promise I did not steal the title from. It is called Black to the Future by Mark Deary, written in 1994. That was just before Patrick and I met. We were very young, very young. Anyway, I want you to read that article. I did not steal my title from it. This is just how Spirit works. Back to the Black future. But I do have another project for you, and it's for you to right now, as we're together, I need for you to go into the future 800 years. The year 2823. What do you see? Now, my husband David wants to know, did we survive as a species? That's his first question. I'll let him preach that one. What do you think will be on this hill in North Druid Hills if we survive as a Unitarian Universalist faith movement? Will we have changed in 800 years? We better. Of course we will. Because that which does not change dies. So in 800 years, the monument that's going to sit here with my statue, never mind. But it will be different. And this morning, I need to ask, who did you see in 800 years here? If we see people there had better be people of African descent in 2823. Just a few 800 years. Remember that 800 years ago, there may have been visitors to this continent, but they weren't from Europe. In Europe, it was the Middle Ages, 1223, and that's not the Renaissance. No printing press yet. Just gay men scribing. How are my descendants living? Now, David and I don't have children by birth. We have a few that we've chosen, but not my children by genetics, but the Black queer ministers of our movement who will be all over the Atlanta area in more than 20 congregations and businesses doing the work of our movement. That's what I'm prophesying. In the Black future, will Atlanta be racially subdivided? In 800 years, the Atlanta-Chattanooga megalopolis. Will it be economically divided 800 years from now? Or will we have come to our senses about what it really takes to survive? Will the American empire have failed by then? Hallelujah. We got some radicals in the house. You are committed as a congregation to go into Afrofuturism for the next few weeks, months maybe? And the article that I gave you as an assignment is Black to the Future by Mark Deary. He is white, but he felt like he needed to write it, and he was approaching it from the angle of, in 1994, which I promise was not that long ago. There weren't enough African American sci-fi writers, nor readers. So he interviewed Samuel Delany, award-winning writer from the 60s. He's biracial and also queer, but also had a long-term relationship with a woman. So some of what the youth are trying to get across to us has always been going on. And there was Samuel, and there was Octavia Butler, and not many more. At least not established, published, and doing well. He also interviewed Tricia Rose, a sociologist, and Greg Tate. I believe he was a reporter, journalist. And I found Samuel Delany while I was doing poetry because in the 90s, he was already lauded for his work and his adventuresome. I do not agree with everything you're going to find out about Samuel Delany, but I do respect him, and I love his science fiction work. But he was basically flying solo as a black queer man for far too long. In the article, it talks about how there must be people of the African diaspora writing science fiction so that we black people can see ourselves depicted in the genre and therefore in the future involved in the techno culture. I'm trying not to have too many asides because we have children who need to meet up with y'all at a particular hour, but it is my birthday. Y'all, the red line that separated folks by race and economics is the same line that can tell you who has good Wi-Fi and who doesn't. That's Afro-present. And if you don't have Wi-Fi now, try to pay your gas bill. If black people are not depicted in the future, which we are now, in many ways, thank God. But if we weren't for so many years, what's the implication about what happened to me and some members of Conundrum? I propose this morning that we, people of African descent and direct African heritage, let's not leave out the place we came from, the continent of Africa. By the way, thank you so much for Sankofa and for your story from the Akan people. It just so happens that I'm genetically related. And unlike any other people named Teague or Walker, Walker's my mother's folks, I know because of a genetic test. And during this article, Samuel Delany mourns the fact that he didn't know where in Africa he came from or what people. Technology has so changed things that I can wear this and I'm not misrepresenting. I'm just wearing clothes from home. I propose that if in your future you don't have people of African descent, you don't have people. That you can't go into your future without us, because you haven't gone anywhere else without us. You've accomplished nothing in this country without us. And if you take slavery and the wealth from it, out of the equation, you don't have much left in Europe. Amen? Amen. I'll return to that later. Interconnectedness, though, implies that your survival depends on mine. When I was a small child, we black folks were not featured in science fiction. And then Star Trek, not the movies, not the cartoons, not the cable channel series, but the original Star Trek series that I heard Lucille Ball had to be convinced to produce. They dared to put a black woman at the communications desk on the Starship Enterprise, and Nichelle Nichols, God rest your soul, sat there with the other Starfleet officers. I so wanted to tell the tech team to put her picture up, but I didn't get that. But you know who Nichelle Nichols is. She sat there with the other Starfleet officers doing her translation and reporting directly to Captain James T. Kirk. And she was stunning. She was alive and well, and she was not there to clean the Enterprise. When she was featured on the Enterprise, we were barely on television as more than servants and maids. She was not there as a woman of ill repute. Lieutenant Uhura was in the future, and so we made it, at least on television. And in the films, she even returned white-haired and still feisty, still kind of good-looking. And if I'm not mistaken, she was a major in Starfleet with her own ship. And the actor, Miss Nichols, actually worked with NASA to produce more African American and young women in NASA to pursue science and math and our exploration of space. Out of costume, she did that. Back to the black future. Did you know she was convinced to stay in the role because her lines were so short and so insignificant to her that she was going to leave Star Trek? And a little minister from Georgia told her not to leave, Reverend Martin Luther King, because she thought she needed to do more for the movement. Dr. King said, "You are doing for the movement by staying in the role." When else were we going to see a black woman in the future on the deck of the ship? So she didn't leave Star Trek. And I know there are fans here and supporters of the Black Panther Marvel universe who knew that when Duncan gets up there, he's going to do a spoiler for both movies. I am not. Because it is the apex of Afrofuturism, as explored in that one little article even. Because they wondered, where are black people going to express themselves and be involved in the techno future? And then somebody at Marvel took a risk when they said black films won't sell. All the way to the bank. They took a calculated risk, and we thank God for it. And someone in the office decided that African cultures, because there are hundreds shown in the film, all mashed up together, and it works. It could be the focal point of a superhero that Chadwick Boseman would play and lead many other talented African American and African actors and creatives, and it turned out to be one of their most profitable ventures in an Afrofuturistic setting. I am going to tell you, though, that when the cartoon or the comic book came out in the 60s, they didn't have it quite worked out. And it was the late 60s, and it was called Black Panther. Uh-oh. And the Black Panther Party was becoming more and more famous and more radical. And the comic was suffering from the association, and there were some folks who didn't necessarily want to buy something called Black Panther. And the writers they had didn't know what to do. So it almost failed. And they hired an African-American radical. I'm going to call him radical. He probably was just proud of who he was. The character is based on a king and an emissary from an African country called Wakanda. Don't look it up on the map. Please don't do that. And when they hired Christopher Priest to come in and save this comic, he's raising up the king part and the emissary part and his royalty and his line, and that's the roots of what have become the new series. Guess what his white counterparts told him to do with the series? Make it more street. What street? They couldn't fictionalize a successful, techno-advanced, Afrocentric superhero. Make it more street. Oh, I could preach for a couple of hours, Don. I'm not. I promise I'm not. But I'm going to, at some point, tell you who came up with some of the crap that's going on in hip hop, and they don't look like me. We might have to be planting some sugar cane in some of our corn. I appreciate our financially winning and award-winning Black Panther films because we're not only in the future, but we're leading it. We of African descent are respected in the series. And if we're to take Sonia's story to heart, we must also look back on a true past, not a mythologized past, not a mythical one, and decide that Wakanda exists because we exist. The intelligence of Wakanda is not make-believe. It's the same intelligence that says to plant something life-sustaining amidst the crops that you're paid for once a year, by the way. Sonia left that out of her story. They got paid once a year. How many of y'all get paid monthly? And by the 28th, we're wondering. Can you imagine getting a check in January and it's August? That's how sharecroppers had to figure out what to do. And we can use that creativity and that knowledge. Wakanda, even if it's only in fiction. My ancestors survived, and they're holding Wakanda up, and they're holding President Obama up. They're holding Atlanta and Washington, D.C., and all the African-American neighborhoods in Atlanta and Chicago and Dallas and Memphis are being held up by their prayers and their nonfiction dreams. My very presence here in this future of my grandparents who could not have imagined in Bullard, Texas, and Muskogee, Oklahoma, that I would be alive and here dressed like this, a son of a son and a son of their daughter, in the deep South, at a community called North Druid Hills that's more Jewish than African American. But I was here. And we are proclaiming the fight for liberty still. But this time, liberty for all who have held back by economics, not just by racial bias, liberty that's inclusive of genders that we forgot about when we became colonized by rifles and Bibles. I am here proclaiming the readiness for a liberty that I did not imagine watching Star Trek as a child, but now enjoying in another Star Trek series where the starship is led by a black woman, Michael Burnham, and her chief science officer is involved romantically with the ship's medic, a Puerto Rican of African descent, and they're both men. Does your vision of where we must go in the future include all of us? Can you see us? So do we have some writers here this morning who can put us on the hill right here in 2823 in the diverse and richness of what we dream about in the black and brown and indigenous future? Can you see us? And I'll warn you that if you cannot see some of us of color in the future, I'm proposing that none of the human family will survive. We are so intertwined that our survival, despite the desire not to look back in our American cultural craziness, we have such amnesia. Okay, I'm gonna risk it. I put on my Facebook page that it's January 6th, whether you have voted in your speaker or not. I haven't forgotten. You can play games if you want to. We are coping with a minority that desire to return, not like the Sankofa, with the preciousness of an egg, the preciousness of wonder, the preciousness of creativity, but they want to return to some of the worst embedded in human nature. We ain't going. And they're not talking about far in the future, they're talking about now. They don't realize that that spells destruction for them too. Major Uhura, put in a channel to the UUs of 2023, 22-23. Tell them we see them, we bless them, and we are on our way. Come out.